your willingness to give us to give us a presentation about Islam and modernity and the Islamic revival amidst Western dominant discourse, challenges and response. So we're very pleased to have you. I will just start with an introduction about your kind self. Dr. Sami Al-Arian is the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, SIGA, and public affairs professor at Istanbul Sabah Zaim University. He received his PhD in computer engineering in 1986 and was a tenured academic in the US for 2 decades. He has over 40 publications to his credit. During his 4 decades in the US, Dr. Al-Arian founded numerous institutions and produced publications in the field of education, research, religion, and interfaith, as well as civil and human rights. Actually, the biography is very long. MashaAllah, you have books, poetry, and studies and analysis on current issues. So let me just go and mention some of these. Dr. Al-Arian was a prolific speaker across many US campuses, especially on Palestine, Islam, and the West, and civil rights. In 2001, he was named by Newsweek the premier civil rights activist in the US for his efforts to repeal the use of secret evidence in immigration courts in the US. In 2012, he was profiled by historians in the Encyclopedia of American Dissidents as one of the only 3 Muslims in the US out of 152 dissidents and prisoners of conscience that were included in the series in the past century, along with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. His US story was featured in 2007 in the award-winning documentary, The US versus Al-Arian, and in 2016 in the book, Being Palestinian. Dr. Al-Arian has written several studies and numerous articles focusing on US foreign policy, Palestine, and the Arab Spring phenomena. His book on poetry, on spirituality, Palestine, and human rights, Conspiring Against Joseph, was published in 2004. He is also the author of The Arab Awakening and Unveiled, Understanding Transformations and Revolutions in the Middle East. Today, Dr. Al-Arian will talk about, as I mentioned earlier, Islamic revival amidst Western dominant discourse, challenges and response. I also prompted the students that they can ask you on Palestine, because some of them have posed throughout the semester challenging questions to me. So I have asked, I kind of urged them to, if they have, in the question and answer period, questions about Palestine or recent events in the Middle East, because mashallah, you have a wide expertise in all these areas. So we really want to take full benefit from your presence with us. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Arian. Sorry, I made a long introduction, but your biography is very long and is very rich. And actually, the person who prompted the invitation also just joined us. So we're happy to have you. And inshallah, it will be a very productive session today. We have until Salat al-Maghrib. Salat al-Maghrib, I think, starts around 6 o'clock. All right, so we have 2 hours, but you don't have to stay for the 2 hours. I know you must have other commitments, as you wish. I mean, like, just, we do the presentation, then will be followed by question and answer. And sorry for the long introduction. Tfadal, Dr.
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation and for your kind introduction. And I'm really pleased to address the students. Dr. Hamad is a very old, dear friend of mine, and I would never say no to him. I'm honored actually to be with you and to address this very important topic. I'll try to be brief. I've looked at the syllabus, and I know that throughout the semester you've covered many aspects of the concept of modernity and postmodernity, which are the challenges that the Muslim Ummah and the Muslim world at large have been facing for at least 2 centuries. So I will not dwell much on this. What I would like to do is to tell a story, our story, which really started And when I say our story, I'm talking about the Muslim Ummah at large. It started with the state of Medina, the state of the Prophet, which I would call, and here I'm borrowing a term from the Sudanese philosopher Abul Qasim Haj Hamad. He wrote a book in 1979 called The Second Universality of Islam, Al-Alamiyyah al-Islamiyyah al-Thaniya. Even though I embrace this concept, I take a different argument that he did in his book. Nevertheless, I do embrace the term. So what I would consider as Al-Alamiyyah al-Islamiyyah al-Ula, the first universality of Islam, this started with the state of Medina of the Prophet in the first, obviously, Hijri calendar. And it stayed for almost 1,300 years. I'm just trying to put this in the context of time and space. For 1,300 years, the Islamic civilization started and flourished throughout the world. Within less than a century, it reached all the way from the east and the west, from the east up probably until China, and from the west all the way until Andalusia or modern-day Spain. And certainly the Islamic civilization embraced all aspects of civilization: philosophy, law, urbanization, architecture, science, medicine, industry, government, politics, every aspect of life. The Islamic civilization law, certainly, it touched upon it. And there has, throughout the history of this Islam, the disciplines have been developed to the point where you could see even within the Islamic discipline, there has been many disciplines, and I'm sure that your college have been embracing much of these disciplines and trying to deal with them. I'm talking about things that have to do with hadith, with Quran, with fiqh, and so on and so forth, Sharia in general. And certainly this Islamic civilization had its ups and downs. It wasn't always on a straight up, it was going up and down, but normally the trend was going up. And the one note I would like to say here before I move on to the second point is that the purity, the spirituality, the strength of this civilization, which was based on the book that was revealed, Al-Quran, as well as the model of the Prophet, his life and his teachings, they stayed for very few decades. In other words, very early on in the Islamic historical experience, there was a deviation and corruption that started as early as the third Khalifa, but it really became more of a political corruption by the time the concept of Khilafah, which was based on Shura and Bay'ah in the early days, became basically a sort of a dynasty and kingdom. And that had an impact on how the whole experience developed throughout the centuries after that. In other words, once that model, which did not take hold because it only stayed for a few decades, that had a great impact on many of the things that was taking place throughout the Islamic history. And it wasn't different from many of the empires and the dynasties that existed throughout the world. But there is a major difference for indeed, and which is the impact of the Quran, the impact of the Islamic values and principles embodied in the Quran that permeated not just the political class and the political elites, but went deep into society. That's why much of that civilization was not built on rulers and political elites, but was built on common people, on scholars, as well as on every aspect of society. And that's why you could see that value, for example, of how Islam dealt with the concept of the social class, the concept of inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, that the best amongst you are those who fear God, and the concept of taqwa, fearing God, the concept of social class and solidarity within society, and all kinds of teachings that were preserved. So the political class, even though it was corrupted at a particular level, which is the level of ruling, this corruption did not go all the way to society. So within society, you could see that Islamic values and Islamic principles were upheld to a large degree, where the whole concept, obviously, of how to live a society, let's say, a godly society, a society that is related to God's teachings and principles of Islam, they were pretty much lived, even though there were moments of weaknesses and strengths, but to the large extent, we had a civilization that is celebrated not just within the Islamic world, but even worldwide. Indeed, when you look at the development of European civilization, Western civilization, once it divorced itself from the dark ages, what they did is that they went straight to the principles of Islamic civilization, where rationality played a role, but under certain conditions, that rationality cannot override the knowledge that we get from the word of al-ghaib, or from God, from revelation. And also you could see that the role of science and all these things, all these barriers that the West had during the Dark Ages, which Muslims or the Islamic civilization was able to tear down, all these things they learned also from the Islamic experiences. In fact, even in the legal system, if you look at the concept of a jury, which the British embrace and then the Americans embrace, you will find that it can be traced back to the Maliki fiqh and the Maliki madhab in Islamic Spain and Andalusia. Much of the principles of seeking the truth and trying to use logic and argue for rational decisions, all that you could also see it within the jurisprudence, within Islamic usul, fundamentals of Islamic jurisprudence. All that was also, and of course, a lot of it could, or part of it could be traced back to Greek philosophy, but the West was not able to discover Greek philosophy except for the Muslims using it in terms of different philosophers. In other words, we lived a situation, an experience, a civilization that spanned over 1,300 years and had a huge impact on the world. While the West was living in its dark ages, the world did not live dark ages. The world was actually living in golden ages because of the Muslim civilization. And I don't think even the most hardened anti-Muslim Islamophobe or intellectual in the West would deny these facts. Now, what happened, of course, is that because of the notion of that political corruption as well, and its impact on certain aspects in society, particularly in the realm of law and the realm of politics as well as economics, there was a period where there was no progress. There was a situation where the progress stopped to take place and to take hold. There was a gap between the elite groups as well and the rest of society. That progress was not maintained because of the political system was at a loggerhead, was not able to maintain the vibrance in society, and to award those who are contributing to society and punish those who are trying to seek dominance or seek privileges where they do not deserve it. Of course, that happens in most societies, but in the case of the Muslims, this was happening over the years, along with that we had different experiences, some of them positive, some of them negative, throughout the Muslim world. We never had really a contiguity, in other words, of the Muslim. We always have different dynasties and different places of the centers of civilization, the urban areas, you started, of course, in Arabia, then you went to Syria, Iraq, and then we have Andalusia, we have North Africa, we have the Mughals in India, and so on and so forth. So it was different experiences, which makes it very rich, but at the same time, it was more centered around these dynasties that were taking place. While this is taking place, another experience was taking hold in the West. And of course, that culminated between the years of 1600 and 1800, which I see that was the focus of much also of your discussions on modernity. These are the times where there was a divorce taking place between church and state, because the teachings of the church were not based on revealed truth, but rather on teachings that had half-truths and sometimes no truth at all. And it was having a stranglehold on society with a political system that was not just corrupt, but very oppressive, the feudal system and so on and so forth. And after the religious wars that was taking place, and with the Treaty of Westphalia, where you had a new political system, a new political class, and then with the Renaissance period, with the Enlightenment period, culminating in the French Revolution in the 18th century, along with the Industrial Revolution, which was basically unleashed after that divorce taking place. Then we had a new form of a world. We had a world where the gap became bigger and wider, and the center of the world became a new kind of knowledge, a new kind of understanding of the world and the relationship between the man and the word, while the Muslims always presented a view or a paradigm where God was center in their understanding of life, of history, of future, of death, of hereafter. This new knowledge, or this new truth, quote unquote, or between quotations, was not based on this. It was based more on rationality and science. These are the basis for finding truth, and that's the essence of what modernity is. And of course, along with many others, the concept of capital, the accumulation of wealth, the concept of markets, mass markets, in order to become wealthy and dominant. And of course, that took an age of its own, and we could see that culminating in the phenomena of imperialism once the Western societies was able to come up with its own paradigm. Those early philosophers, Descartes, Bacon, Newton, and Hobbes, and John Stuart Mill, and so on and so forth, they were able to articulate a new understanding of how we can find truth and how we can advocate for this truth, which is divorced completely from anything that is not material, anything that is spiritual, or anything in the realm of, in the words of the Quran, of alam al-ghayb. All these things are not being recognized, and they do not have any kind of value within the concept of how we should live our lives and how we should organize our social lives, and so on and so forth. So with the emergence of the Industrial Revolution, with the emergence of this new concept, which some people may refer to as the secularization of the world, we have the emergence of imperialist powers. These imperialist powers, within a few decades, were able to overwhelm and take over much of the world, particularly in the heart of the world, which is the Muslim world. So beginning in the 19th century, we saw the Napoleonic wars starting of course, in Egypt, and throughout. Of course, he withdrew later, but that has a very important impact. This was probably the first encounter since the Crusaders between the Muslims and the West, by which the Muslims were encountering a new paradigm, new models, and a new thinking. And of course, after that came as a prelude to an era of direct colonization. We saw that throughout, in the French in Algeria, in the Italians in Libya, and of course the French throughout North Africa, including Tunisia and Morocco. We saw it, of course, with the colonization of Egypt by the British, and of course the French influence before that during the successors of Muhammad Ali with his modernizing program. We saw it also throughout the eastern part of the Arab world with the English colonization, and up until the Sykes-Picot Accords of 1915-1916, where the remnants of the Ottoman Empire was divided and became more of influenced by the British and the French. And initially it was with the Russians, but the Russians, after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, withdrew from that. The point is that this process, this challenge, while the Islamic world was at its weakest point because of the divorce between the principles that the first Islamic universality was based upon, even with political corruption, it was not maintained, and it was the gap between, particularly in military technology, but also in other forms of civilization. This had a huge impact on. It has a huge impact on that relationship. So, in short, we reached a point where the gap has widened. We have a Western civilization that has set its model, its paradigm based on finding truth based on science and rationality, and of course that stayed for several centuries. And the people, when they talk about postmodernism, where this model actually failed to bring together the ultimate truth, and therefore we reach the age of post-modernity, where everything is relative. There is really no frame of reference. In other words, in modernity, there was the frame of reference, or the frame of reference of science and rationality, reason, where man is the ultimate arbiter of what the truth could be through this very meticulous process. But after they found out that there is really no truth that can be discerned from these things, they reached that age, which has been roughly now in existence for at least 3 or 4 decades. Now we're talking about where there is no frame of reference, that truth is relative. Everything is relative. Nothing is certain. And of course, that would ultimately take mankind to the point where if everything is relative, then, and there is no a notion of what the truth is, then there could be no truth at all, or there could be that the concept of truth has no meaning whatsoever. So we've reached a point where we have two paradigms. And I want to mention this. I've been talking about this in different contexts, in the context of identity, but I think we can also use it here, because it's very important when we talk about how to respond to this challenge of modernity and post-modernity, is that we need first to come up with a model by which this model would be the controlling instrument by which we can interpret what's happening and also moving forward. I would look at Western model basically as having a straight line with 2 endpoints. At one end is man, is the human being, and at the other is the universe. And the instruments, or the models, the laws, the relationships that man develops of how to control the world, how to subjugate the world, how to hegemonize the world, is the model basically of Western civilization. In other words, there is no notion except the material world. And the objective, the goal, is to how we can take over, how we can subjugate, how we can control, how we can utilize this world to the best of our ability. And as far as the relationship between man and man, it's also using the Darwinian concept and paradigm is that those who are stronger, those who are more rational, those who are richer, those who are more capable are the ones who deserve to rule the world and deserve to take care of the world and deserve to rule over the world and to be in control other than those who are weak. And therefore you have this, of course, social Darwinism that has been basically ruling the world ever since. And when you look at the international system, the international order, the premise, the basic assumption of the international order, particularly in the past century, century and a half, but more, of course, we can see it within the last 70, 80 years since the end of World War II, is that they consider that there is really no arbiter, there is no higher power, that the world is anarchic, the world is in chaos. And therefore, the only way to survive is through sheer military and economic power. And the more powerful you are, then the more you're capable of not only surviving, but also setting the rules, but also being in control of other powers. There is no, this myth that the West is trying to propagate throughout weaker societies of international law, of a world order that is based on fairness and equality. It's just a myth. It's not true at all. What it is they created instruments within the whole world, institutions within the whole world that will guarantee how they can control and subjugate the rest of society. The age of imperialism that existed in the 19th and 20th century, which by the end of the 20th century ended, and by the middle of the 20th century actually ended, is no longer capable of pursuing these kind of goals, which is how to subjugate the world and how to subjugate people to the will of that paradigm, which is what I would call the secular paradigm. Now, that does not negate the fact, and I don't want to be misunderstood, that everything in Western civilization is bad and negative. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm just trying to look at the heart of this model, which is basically it depends on the human being. So if the human being is intrinsically bad and vicious and violent, that's what will prevail. And of course, man is also capable of doing a lot of good things. So it just depends on that person. So there are many aspects within the Western model, Western civilization that could be good, and you could see these trends come and go. But the essence of it is really the exploitation of other people and the subjugation of the world, because the world basically is one world, and it's a material world, and the question of survival is at the center of it, and states form and become powerful in order to remain in order to survive and remain in a position where they can dominate. So what we have in the age of modernity was, just to conclude this point, what we have is the dominance of the Western model over all other civilizations, to the point where they were able to set a whole world, or have a world order that is privileging Westerners and Western civilization over the rights of others. And of course, the Muslim world was at the center of it. And they used three tactics in order to do this. And I'm only summarizing and trying to be as simple as possible. I'm not trying to make it difficult, so because we can go through each one of them and we have subcategories. But basically, politically, through fragmentation, where they fragmented the Muslim world into different societies, on the same model of the nation-state system, which was a solution to the European wars, basically was religious wars. So this was the idea that we can't live together with our ethnicities and different faith traditions, and therefore we have to recognize that we can never subjugate each other, and therefore we have to live in peace. So each country will have its own sovereignty within its own border, and then we'll try to find how we can live together in common. And of course, that gave rise to also them going out and colonizing the world, starting from the new world all the way to the old world. Of course, that concept we don't have, because in Islam, what brings people together, at least in theory, was faith rather than ethnicities and language or different languages or a common history. It was this faith, this bond that should really override and take priority over everything else. Nevertheless, they were able to set the rules and establish a word by which they can fragment Muslim societies because they were a challenge to them. And of course, economically, by making them more dependent on them, and they established many institutions to do that. I mean, if you go and study particularly two institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, you will find that these were simply tools and instruments designed and run by defense officials out of the Pentagon and other national security agencies in order to make sure that these societies would be totally controlled. The main purpose of the World Bank is to make sure that these societies that they would like to control will not produce their food, that they will not be self-reliant in agriculture, that they will be that they will have so much debt that they cannot have an independent foreign policy or an independent policies altogether. And you will find, always the head of the World Bank is somebody who was a high official within the Defense Department, because that's part of their tactics. And with the IMF, it's the sister organization that is trying to make sure that societies will not be able to pay their debts, and that they will have so much debt that they will always be pushed towards certain policies that will advantage and privilege Western companies and Western countries. And there are so many examples that I don't have time to go, but these are just two examples of how the economy is being run and taken out of the indigenous people who represent obviously what is called third world, but particularly Muslim countries. Not to say of how they deal with the rich part of the Muslim countries, like the oil-producing countries, which are totally fragmented and weak and small, and they have to rely on Western protection. And with that comes a price. They have to sell their products, their oil and gas, in dollars. They can spend whatever they want, and that by demanding that they spend it in dollars, that means that that America is the real owner, because it's the one that actually prints the dollars. And then whatever excess of dollars they have to take it back and invest it in the American economy. So you will find many of the Muslim countries, particularly the rich ones, have closer to 1.7 trillion with a T dollars invested in the US, and they have very little recourse in terms of being able to get much of it back. So this is a new form of imperialism that we live under, which make it very difficult for the Muslim world to fight back. Now, how much time do I have? So I don't want to talk.
Let's say 20 minutes.
Okay.
20. It's up to you, but if 20 minutes, will that be okay, or you have?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I'll try to be brief. So what I did is I presented a world for you, which is dominated by Western discourse. And here we're talking about in terms of the underpinning civilization model, which is the concepts of modernity and post-modernity. And of course, these things are very fluid, but basically they represent Western dominant civilization. Now, when we look at the Islamic world, theoretically speaking, the Islamic world, whether it is during its first universality, and I believe what we're doing now, we're living in between these two universalities, between العالمية الإسلامية الأولى والعالمية الإسلامية الثانية. In other words, the first universality of Islam is gone, is come and gone. That was gone by the fall of the Caliphate, if we have to give it a date. So now we're living in between, and if we believe that the Quran says that at one point there will be another universality of Islam, another Islamic civilization, a second Islamic civilization. That Islamic civilization will have certain characteristics that it will share with the first one, but it will also have characteristics that is divorced, that it did not exist with the first universality. And this is a very important fact, and this is a very important observation I want you to have out of, if you didn't get anything out of this talk, at least have that in mind, is that whatever comes in the future is not going to be the same as in the past. So all these experiments, all these movements, all these trends and currents and parties that they were trying to basically take whatever was in the past and try to see if they can project it into the present, that would fail. That would not work, because the word evolves and the word changes, and the challenges that the first civilization, Islamic civilization, faced are different from today's challenges, and in some instances quite different. So there will be shared values and shared characteristics, and there will also be different ones and new ones. And the intellectuals of the world, the students like yourselves, they should be looking at what are the features, what are the characteristics that are constant that we need to keep, and what are the ones which are variable and that we need to discover and try to work on and see what they are and how they can evolve. Now, the thing that needs to be kept in mind is that while the paradigm of the secular world, of the Western world, of the modern world, is a straight line with 2 points. One is man trying to subjugate the universe. The paradigm of the Muslim world is it's like a triangle with 3 nodes, 3 points. One is God, one is man, and one is universe. So the man and universe are constant. What is added to this is the concept of God. And when we add God to the logic, then the whole relationship between man and universe becomes completely different. In this model, which is the Islamic model, it's not an anarchic word, that the man is under the authority of God as understood in Revelation, in the Quran. In other words, man cannot do whatever they please. It's not just based on science and discovery and rationality and an argument. It has also to be subjugated to the teachings or to the understandings or to the principles and values given in Revelation. That is a very important limitation, which puts Islamic concept here as being one that is not informed simply by the human activity and mind, that it has to be guided, that human activity and mind has to be guided by God's teachings, by God's revelation. And that's a very important distinction. Now, the relationship between God and man is based on that man has accepted God's authority as understood in the Quran. Of course, the interpretations here is what is subject. And of course, many people said, okay, we accept, but the problem is interpretations. But that's details that we can talk about. And the relationship between man and universe is not based on how I can subjugate the universe to my whims and to my needs, but rather how I can build that universe so that it can celebrate with me as man the presence of God. And the relationship, of course, between God and the universe is God made that universe available to man to explore and to subjugate and to build. So that is in roughly what the model is. We have a 2 straight line model, and we have a 3-node or triangle model, and this is where the conflict takes place. Whenever Muslims would like to bring about this model where they can make God and revelation relevant to society, you will have a pushback, particularly from a powerful source, which is Western paradigm, that this is unacceptable, this is irrational, this is something that deals with something that I do not understand, it's beyond this world. Because in Islam, we combine alam al-ghaybi wa shahada. We understand that revelation gives us understanding beyond our immediate world, gives us understanding beyond what is before us. and that this life did not start, at birth and ends at death, that there's another realm that will take place, and therefore we need to be prepared for that. It's a completely different frame of mind, which Western mentality does not want to understand and doesn't want to adhere to or even accept. The problem, of course, that within Muslim societies to advocate for this model, then you are in conflict not just with Western values and Western countries and Western powers, because during this process of secularization, of imperialism, there has been a class within Muslim societies that embraced these paradigms and embraced this notion and have been secularized to the point where they can probably articulate the Western model and accept it even in a more brutal way than the Western themselves. And so you have this internal conflict taking place within Muslim societies. Add to that, of course, how the West has dominated Muslim societies in every aspect, not just in thought, in politics, in economics, in law, in technology, in culture. Everywhere you go, you have all these challenges all around you. And that means that when we look at response, we have to define what the real problem is, as well as what the real goal is. The problem with Islamic revival movements, all the Islamic movements that came after the fall of the Caliphate, in the Arab world, in the non-Arab world, in the Indian subcontinent, in Iran, in Turkey, in other places, and of course, Iran is a different society, but I will take that aside because of what happened in their revolution. But normally speaking, when you look at these Islamic revival movement, what they did is that they tried to build a model within the framework of what exists, including basically accepting the dominance of Western thought, Western culture, and trying to see if they can do any reforms from within. And because inherently the West does not want to give any kind of space to this thought, they have been confronting these attempts in every way they can. What happens in Palestine, or what happened in Palestine, which I could say a lot about it, but I don't have the time, is the fact that they implanted their Jewish problem, because they didn't like their Jews, they were prosecuting them. So they transplanted them from Europe into the heart of the Muslim world. So they dealt with two problems at once. On one hand, they got rid of their excess Jews that they didn't like. They implanted them in the heart of the Muslim world to make sure they would be kept weak, fragmented, exhausted, dependent, unable to make any kind of civilizational progress, of any kind of renaissance or unity or what have you, because they make sure that this entity that they created in the heart of the Muslim world is going to be stronger and more powerful than all other countries combined, and they will make sure that all the conditions to make sure that this state survives and flourishes and dominates and become the hegemony in the area is the case. And we've seen this, of course, vividly in the past few months. The point I'm trying to make is that we have to look at what is it that we have to do in order to go from this point to that point. The Islamic movement that existed in the Arab world, they did not look at that as being the greatest challenge, even though they recognize it. They looked at the impact, the consequences of the biggest challenge, which is foreign influence, and they tried to deal with it. So, and they embedded the notion of the nation-state system. So they start thinking as a Muslim Egyptian and a Muslim Jordanian and a Muslim Syrian and a Muslim Tunisian and a Muslim Moroccan and Algerian and Sudanese and so on and so forth. This whole thing, which, these borders that the imperialist powers built, they internalize it and they start working within that small area in order to see how they can progress and bring about an Islamic Renaissance or bring about an Islamic civilization. And of course, most of them failed, with very, very, very few exceptions. And these exceptions are on the margin, not at the heart of the challenge. So my contention here is that when you look at these issues, the issue of what is the biggest threat to the start of the second universality of Islam, in my opinion, my view, and how we go about it. And my answer is that the biggest challenge really is foreign influence and foreign hegemony and foreign control, which goes beyond the military and political aspect into all other aspects, including the intellectual and cultural aspects, which is how do we deal with modernity, and how we deal with these notions, and how we bring about the model. And I think there has been some good work done on that we can probably control. I didn't see it in your readings, but I'm sure that Dr. Hamad can also forward to you some of the work, for example, of Ismail al-Farouqi and others, who talked about what are the basic principles and the characteristics of an Islamic civilization and model could be, and then also in other disciplines. But I want to mention, before I conclude, and I forget, two more important things, is that we have a problem, because, and I alluded to it in the beginning, which is the political corruption, is that even within our tradition, part of the prerequisites for the second universality of Islam, to understand the challenges and deal with them in a fruitful, meaningful way, is that we need to look at our tradition and re-examine it and re-evaluate it. The things that have already been, you've been told, and I don't say these things in public because it brings me a lot of trouble. I say it only within the context of intellectuals, of people who actually can understand what I'm talking about. We have in our tradition things that are in direct contradiction of basic concepts of Islam and the Quran. Yet they have become part of the tradition, either because of the political environment that they were created under, and therefore because of the length of time they have been accepted, they became basically sacrosanct. They became things that it's very difficult to change and even look at. And I can give you two examples. For instance, in hadith, you will find that there are many hadith that are in direct contradiction in their spirit, at least, with things that are very well known in the Quran, yet it's very difficult to deal with them because they have been accepted throughout centuries by certain scholars or by certain political systems. And therefore, to question this, that will put you in trouble with many of the intellectuals and the scholars of your time. And therefore, that issue is closed, is done with. And of course, I see some attempts now, but even these attempts put their people in trouble. The problem is that we cannot do them at a mass level because they are used by those who will try to destroy Islam, whether they are Westerners or their allies within the Muslim world. So any questioning of a tradition, even if it is questionable, becomes a weapon in the hands of those who would like to destroy any notion of the return of Islam to public life. And therefore, it becomes very tricky. How do you deal with this issue? If the issue of the second universality of the continuation of the relevance of Islam in public life is going to take a center stage, we cannot do it with existing tools and existing notions and beliefs. Some of them in usul al-fiqh, some of them, with hadith and others, and we can't use with that. We cannot use them. We cannot progress unless we look at them critically. And at the same time, if you look at them critically in a moment of weakness, they are used to destroy you. So it becomes a dilemma. And one way out of this dilemma is that those who deal with these issues should be at the elite intellectual level and not at the mass level, because the impact on the mass level could be devastating. But that gives you notion of why looking at the West as the source, and I'm talking the West here very loosely, I mean the Western dominance in all spheres, as being the source of not being able to become independent and to become sovereign, by which you can start, you can experience, you can experiment with any model until you reach the state of maturity where that model could actually be applied on societies. In other words, if you look at the Arab revolutions, from 2011 until roughly 2015, these 3 or 4 years, in which there was mass protests and mass demonstrations in order looking for change, and most of them were very genuine aspirations and many genuine desires for real change to address the corruption that taking place in society. You would find that most of them were not able to succeed because the Western dominant regimes and their allies in the region would not allow that. And therefore, our grand strategy, or our first priority, or our first goal should be how we can find ways to eradicate, to extract, to expunge foreign influence in societies. And I can go through this for an hour, giving you different examples, but I'm not talking about small things like, I'm going to boycott McDonald's or this. No, I'm talking about much deeper than that. I'm talking about looking at every aspect of our life and see how it impacts Western dominance over any kind of understanding what the word is. This is basically looking at modernism at its root. We're not rejecting it, but we're not accepting it either. We are looking at it critically and trying to see how it could be reconciled with our understanding of our faith and tradition. But then that is not enough. We have to make sure that we do understand our faith and tradition, that not that we understand faith and tradition of some things that happened to get into our faith and tradition while it doesn't really represent it. And I'm here referring to a lot of Israelite stories and Israelite things that you can find it within the body of the tradition that have been unfortunately accepted by many scholars, and they became part of people's lives. So today, for example, you'll find people are waiting for Christ to come down, or waiting for the Antichrist to come and dominate the world. And there are millions within the Muslim world today. They think we live in the age of the Antichrist, we live in the age of this, and they start looking at the world in a completely different way, and all their energies, all their intellectual capacity, all their potential is wasted on something that is not at the heart of the Islamic civilization, is not at the heart of the Quran, is not at the heart of its tenets and beliefs, and therefore they are taken into completely different, or some hadith and traditions in which they will try to celebrate and make people more into the spiritual realm, where they really have very little interest or understanding of what happens in the world. And you have millions of people who go into these traditions in the Sufis and the Tariqas and this and that, thinking that this is the way for salvation, where if you look at the early days of Islam, this was far from it. I mean, this is not the life that the Prophet lived. This is not the life that the Sahabas lived. And yet this goes all the way until it really paralyzes great segments. And I can go on with many examples. The point is that these two things go hand in hand. How you can address foreign influence and foreign domination and control, and at the same time you want to build your own paradigm, and you have to look at it critically and how we can clean it up, how we can look at this without having to destroy in the process the whole religion. This is a very delicate process that needs really specialized people, specialized intellectuals, and movements. The movements will have to deal with foreign influence, and the intellectual ones, they have to deal with the tradition, and how we can reconcile these things is the real challenge that we have to face. Let me end by saying that Brzezinski, who was a national security advisor to Qatar, and he was an intellectual, and he comes from the same university that Dr. Hamad graduated from, Johns Hopkins, and he defines in one of his books the sources of power. And he says, in the modern world, there are 4 sources of power. He talks about military power, economic power, technology, and culture. He doesn't talk about politics and economics because they are just an afterthought. They come with the military. Of course, economic, he doesn't talk about political power because it comes with the military and economic power. and technology and culture. He said, when you look at the West and the Islamic world, we dominate in military, we dominate in economy, we dominate in technology. What we do not dominate in, and they could have a claim on, is culture. So that's why and by culture we mean everything. We mean basically, your understanding of the world, your understanding of history, and how you can embody these thoughts, and you can build a culture by which you can either resist or you can accept Western domination, because a culture is what will make us resist any kind of things that go within our culture that will be in contradiction with our history and with our beliefs and faith. And that tells us that the real basic objective of the West is to make sure that our culture is corrupt. When our culture is corrupt, then they have complete domination. Now we're trying, obviously, to correct that imbalance in economy, in military, in technology, and that will take a long time. But we have to look at our sources of strength, and in this case, it is this paradigm I was talking about, how we can make God relevant to our lives in the modern world, that we do not simply, like Daesh and other groups, try to go and extract a historical model and think that this is the model that will save us. Actually, that will destroy us, because most people will not accept it in today's world. Therefore, we have to look at the sources of our strength. We have to understand, and the basic here is the Quran. The Quran has not been understood in a way that will make modern life relevant to us. And it is capable of doing. It is the only truth, complete truth. Everything else is relative, including, by the way, hadith. Because hadith is not the literal word of God. Hadith is someone's interpretation, and we have to look back at the sanad and the matan. So there's a lot of work here. But the Quran is the only real truth from start to finish, from the first word, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, until min al-jinnati wal nas. Every single word there is God's word. So if you belong to this civilization, that should be the center by which we can actually change many of the things that take place. Let me stop here. And I know I spoke about many things, and some things I wanted to speak about didn't have time to, but inshallah, we'll try to address them